Hello and welcome everyone. I am Gustavo Tolosa and I am in Dallas, Texas. Again, just in case that the feed didn't go through at first, I am Gustavo Tolosa. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I welcome everybody that is logging in. It's really exciting to see so many people from all over the country, and even from Canada and other probably other countries as well. And I just want to say a few words about me. That way, some of you may know me, some of you don't, and you're wondering who is this person. So again, I'm Gustavo Tolosa. I am a concert pianist and I'm a music professor. And I'm also passionate about health and nutrition, and I do a few webinars every now and then with Chef AJ and with Dr. John McDougall. And today we have Chef AJ here, and we have, of course, our guest of honor, Dr. Joan Ifland. And so today we're going to have an amazing time talking about an issue that really touches a lot of us, and it is food addiction. And I think everybody got an email with Dr. Ifland bio, but just to mention a few things, Dr. Ifland is a food addiction professional who is active in both practice and research, and she has maintained a food addiction education practice since the year 1999. In 2015, she founded the Facebook group, Food Addiction Education. I hope a lot of you are part of it. And she's also the author of the popular book, Sugars and Flours, How They Make Us Crazy, Sick, and Fat, which sold in the top 3% of Amazon books for 12 years. And she's currently under contract with Taylor and Francis CRC to edit a textbook on processed food addiction. Dr. Ifland earned her PhD in 2010 at Union Institute in Addictive Nutrition. Her MBA was awarded by Stanford Business School in 1978, and her BA in Economics by Oberlin College in 1974. And lastly, she is the chair of the Council on Food Addiction at the American College of Nutrition. So we are very very happy to have you, Dr. Ifland. And before I pass it on to you, I'm going to briefly pass it on to our co-host, Chef AJ. How are you doing, Chef AJ?
I'm fine. Thank you so much, Gustavo, for doing this. You truly are the webinar wizard to hook up all of us. We're in 3 different cities and 3 different time zones. It's just amazing what you can do. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Dr. Ifland, now you are on the screen, and thank you and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you. I just feel so happy to have this opportunity to share about food addiction. I think many people have food addiction. They might not be aware of it. They certainly might not know what to do about it, but we'll have a very nice hour. Thank you so much for all your efforts, and thank you, Chef AJ.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ifland. I'm so excited to interview you via video because we've talked several times on my teleclass, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with Dr. Ifland, please go to either YouTube or my website, Healthy Taste Online or EatUnprocessed.com, and listen to the 2 interviews I did with Dr. Ifland. I listened to them again last night, and again, I was re-inspired. They're brilliant because, as far as I'm concerned, you are the leading expert on this disease of food addiction, which a lot of people don't even seem to believe is a real disease. And so I hope you will talk to us about what is food addiction and why does it have to have such a horrible name?
Well, it has to have that horrible name because it is genuinely an addiction. Mm-hmm. It is, it's very much like alcoholism. So alcoholism is an addiction that is based on a substance that has calories. So when I think about what has happened to us, I think of sugar like crystallized alcohol, and I think of flour like maybe a powdered alcohol. And that once you get that concept that these substances mixed in with our food they're pretty addictive, reinforced by advertising, cheap prices, a lot of availability, We have a very sophisticated food industry, which is formulating products to be addictive. It's an addiction. It's very, very much like alcoholism.
I like that. I wrote that down, that sugar in flour like crystallized alcohol, because I once heard that bread was like solid beer and beer was like solid bread. And I think up until I discovered you a few years ago, I think most people that have a problem with sugar know that it is addictive.
Yes.
But people don't believe the flour, and that they just don't believe it. Bread is the staff of life. I mean, how could bread be bad?
Well, the bread that we know today is not anything like the bread of the Bible. The bread of the Bible actually could be translated into the word nutrition. So, and it could have meant a bowl of beans. It could have meant pulse, which might be a bowl of grains and beans. If there was something that looked remotely like our bread, it is something made from a grain that a woman would have cracked with a stone, managed to stick together, and then bake on a stone. So that doesn't have any resemblance to this highly refined powder that is made into flour in our culture.
Because it was your book, Sugars and Flours, How They Make Us Crazy, Sick, and Fat, that first made me realize that flour was no different to our brains than sugar.
It activates a different addictive pathway in the brain. So the gluten in flour activates the opiate pathway. Sugar activates the dopamine pathway.
Oh.
It's kind of even worse because you're getting a combination addiction. It's like doing cocaine and alcohol. You're activating two different systems in the brain. And it makes it worse.
And so many things have both sugar and flour. I mean, when you think of any traditional dessert, a cake, a cookie, it's the combination of both sugar and flour, often with high-fat items mixed in and chocolate. So it's really like a quadruple whammy.
Well, there are 7 major categories of addictive foods for which there's evidence. Processed fats activate the same pathway as marijuana.
Mm.
So excessive salt activates the opiate pathways. Caffeine, of course, is kind of blocking the nervous system. It's a receptor called an aldosterone receptor, et cetera, et cetera. So you have sugars. You have, actually, high fructose corn syrup, I think, might be a slightly different action. You have flour. You have excessive salt. You have processed fat. You have caffeine. You have gluten, and then you have the whole Pandora's box of dairy. And dairy does have a naturally occurring morphine in it. It's 4 different kinds of opiates. Mm-hmm. One of them has been shown to attach to the morphine receptor, the opiate receptors in the brain. And you have these 7 categories of addictive foods. And then when you look at fast food meals,
it's all of them practically.
The most popular fast food meals, the tacos, the pizza, the burgers, they're all combinations of those 7 ingredients.
Wow. And these are not foods our ancestors ate at all throughout human history.
No. These are drug concoctions. As far as the body views them, they're drug concoctions.
Yeah, absolutely. And at one time or another, I was addicted to all of them. But I have to tell you, for me, sugar was the hardest, even more so than the caffeine or the nicotine. For me, sugar was absolutely the hardest.
It's a tough withdrawal. It can be. This is another way we know that these are addictive substances because of the withdrawal syndrome. Mm-hmm. There are 11 diagnostic criteria in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Manual for Mental Illnesses, and addictions are considered to be a mental illness. Mm-hmm. That does meet one of the key criteria of those 11, that there is a withdrawal syndrome. Wow. And it's 4 days of headache and stomach ache.
Oh, yeah.
And irritability. Classic withdrawal syndrome.
Anytime I talk, go ahead, Gustavo, please.
No, I was going to ask Dr. Ifland, because I've heard other professionals say that with food, we have something that we would call addiction-like, but not addiction as if, I don't know, seeing, the kind of withdrawals that we see from actual drugs or from alcohol, where you have hallucinations or, things like that. What are your thoughts about AJ said earlier that many people don't believe that food addiction exists at all, and that there's something called maybe addiction-like, but not addiction.
Well, the person who really clarified the situation in the 1990s was Nora Volkoff. She's the executive director of the National Institute for Drug Abuse. She is a fabulous neuroscientist. She really understood how to use neuroscience very early on, starting in the 1990s. And I would say she was the first one to really see from a brain standpoint that food abusers' brains were doing exactly the same thing as drug addicts' brains. So she really broke the case on that. And I don't think you can distinguish sugar, flour, fat, salt, dairy, caffeine, gluten addiction from drug addiction. And people will say, oh, but it's, it's a different degree. And I disagree with that. We see plenty of people coming into our Facebook group who meet all 11 of the diagnostic criteria. That's a severe addiction. It has ruined their lives. It's ruined their relationships, their finances, their education, their careers. It's ruined their physical health, their mental health. They've done dangerous things to get the drugs. It takes up a lot of their time. This is a classic, full-blown addiction right before our very eyes, kind of disguised. Nobody can quite believe that on this kind of a scale you could have an unrecognized addiction, but I think that's what we've got. Yeah.
It does exist on a continuum, though, right, Dr. Ifland? I mean, would you say that
That's so important. If somebody meets one of the criteria, they ought to start paying attention and not let it progress. But if somebody is meeting all 11 of the criteria, they need to get into a very comprehensive program and very, very slowly, over a year or 2 years or 3 years, get their physical health under control, and then get their behavioral health under control, and repair their relationships and restart their careers. It's a long, and it needs to be a very slow process, because you don't want to stress people. That will activate the disease. Yes, there is definitely a continuum of severity.
Would you like to mention what these 11 criterion are, and if any of our listeners could identify with any or all of them?
Yes, so this is the DSM. This is what the American Psychiatric Association very, very carefully puts together. This is the 5th edition, and these are the criteria for alcoholism. So the first one is that the food is taken in larger quantities over a longer period of time than was intended. So this is called unintended use. And almost everybody has this. So almost everybody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be good. And by 10 o'clock, they're eating something. Or, the whole joke, only it's not a joke, it's a tragedy. I'm just going to eat a few of these. And an hour later, the entire bag is gone. So a lot of people meet these criteria, and they wouldn't recognize them as a symptom of addiction. So number 2, unsuccessful efforts to cut down. Now, we see this on a national basis. The research is now showing that all weight loss schemes fail. It's in the range of 95 to 100%. So this is a nationally known criteria, and almost everybody would meet this. And then number 3 is a great deal of time is spent getting the food, eating the food, recovering from the food. And so you see these patterns of behavior where people are hiding food to eat later. Yes, they're with their families, but they wish the families would go to bed so that they can eat their food. They're embarrassed to be eating it in front of other people. So all this kind of activity takes quite a bit of time. Going from fast food to fast food to fast food, that takes a lot of time. So a lot of people will meet criteria number 3. Number 4 is cravings. Now you have to describe cravings to somebody sometimes before they know that they have them. But cravings is number 4. A failure to fulfill major role obligations at work, school, or home. And you do often hear, particularly mothers, saying, if I weren't so tired, if I weren't so obsessed, I would spend more time with my children. A lot of people meet number 4. Number 5, use in spite of recurrent social or interpersonal problems. And this is obviously, you see people whose spouses or loved ones really want them to lose that weight. And it is a problem, and they are fighting about it. Or they don't want to go to bed with their spouse because they're planning to stay up and eat. So this does have a very big impact on relationships. Important social, occupational, or recreational activities are given up. Now, very many people just don't even want to leave their house anymore. They are grossly overweight, or they're more overweight than they were the last time they saw these people, and they don't want to go. Hazardous use. So this is when you put yourself in physical danger in order to use. That is driving and eating. And that is putting food in your mouth that's too hot because you're just so anxious to get that food. So lots of different physically hazardous issues. Use in spite of knowledge. And certainly everybody who's had a bite when they're trying to lose weight knows that they're using in spite of knowledge of a consequence. So that's another one that's almost universal. Tolerance just means you need to eat more of it to get the same effect. And then this withdrawal syndrome. And you hear people, when you hear somebody say, oh, you know, I drank that to be calmer because I was so angry. That person is avoiding withdrawal. So that is one of, we have 2 big categories of evidence. One is this brain image research that Nora Volkoff exemplifies. Eric Stice out in Oregon has also done a lot of this work. We have animal studies. Nicole Lavina has done great animal studies. So we have all the research, and then we have this conformance to the classic addiction behaviors. So, oh my goodness, it's just so hard for me to understand how somebody could look at all of that evidence and say, oh no, this is not bad.
Well, I think because they don't want to look at their own addictions, you know. I mean, I can't tell you how many health professionals, both PhDs and medical doctors that I've interviewed on my show that basically say, they poo-poo it. They say it's not real. There's no such thing as food addiction. You can't be addicted to food because you have to eat. I think, wouldn't it be better if they changed the name to refined food addiction or processed food addiction? I think the name just bothers people.
Yes, it is. Technically, it is processed food addiction. The things that you would just eat off the tree are not typically the problem. However, if somebody has developed extreme sugar sensitivity, the high sugar fruits will also bother them. Yeah.
And this is where the kind of continuum comes in, because some people are more or less sensitive, and also at different times of their life they could be more or less vulnerable to this.
Yes, that's a really good point. So the disease is made worse by stress, by fatigue. You know, there are factors that can come together. Holidays will make the disease worse. So yeah, it's not an even, okay, every day, I know exactly what I have to do to keep the disease under control. Sometimes you have to do a lot more in order to keep the cravings from erupting. Right. Yeah.
So one of my questions is, why, I guess you just kind of answered it, that we're talking primarily about food addiction to highly processed foods, because I don't think I've ever met somebody who was addicted to kale or addicted to butter, you know. So how can we talk about food addiction if you know, there are certain foods like I don't crave those things. I mean, I like them.
Yes. Well, you make the same distinction that you make in alcoholism. You have alcoholic beverages and you have non-alcoholic beverages. You have processed foods, which are addictive. You look at the kinds of processing that those plants have gone through. They're almost identical to the processing that's used in the creation of recreational drugs. Concentration, extraction, removing the fiber, ferment, all of those things that are done to make recreational drugs are the same processes that are used to make processed foods. So you have addictive processed foods on one side, you have non-addictive foods on the other side. And how do we know which is which? Well, one of the ways is the non-addictive foods don't activate those pathways, and the addictive foods do. So you can look at it from the standpoint of the processing. Has this been processed in an addictive way? But you can also look at the brain scan evidence, and there's a difference. Yeah, a big difference.
So wouldn't pretty much 90% of the people fall under the category of food addiction then? Because these foods are already, like you said, they're elaborate and they're made to be addictive.
Yes. Well, this is a really fascinating question. So epidemiology is very fascinating. There's a very interesting parallel here. The tobacco industry was able to addict about 2/3 of the adult population to tobacco through advertising, availability, affordability, reinforced addictive properties in the cigarette. You know, they formulated them, and then they marketed them to the youngest possible audience, preteens. So 2/3 of the adult population got addicted that way. Now, we have about 2/3 of people in the United States as overweight or obese. And you see the same marketing techniques, a lot of availability, use of vending machines, cheap prices, lots and lots of advertising, focusing on the youngest possible market, toddlers in this case. And then you have evidence in, say, Michael Moss's book, Sugar, Salt, Fat, of really concentrated effort to develop foods that go around the satiation circuitry in the brain, highly addictive, formulated to be addictive. We have a former director of research at one of the big companies on national television saying that 3 of his staff were assigned to make products addictive full time. So I think we have some evidence that perhaps, and then in my own doctoral work, I will say that I was able to correlate BMI roughly with severity of addiction. And so, you know, maybe we've achieved the same percentage of addiction to processed foods as we achieved with tobacco. It's possible.
Right. Okay.
Especially when you think about how many people conform. You only have to meet 2 or 3 of those criteria in order to be diagnosed with an addiction. Almost everybody has tried to lose weight and failed. Almost everybody eats in spite of knowledge of consequences, and almost everybody has unintended use. Mm-hmm. So, you know, the evidence is just so consistent, so consistent.
Right. What is what are your thoughts about food addiction related to the set point theory? Someone is asking here.
Oh, you know, when you look at this situation from the viewpoint of the brain, you have this very sad thing going on. The researchers have really turned in the direction of what's called cognitive impairment. I think a common phrase for that would be brain damage. Reversible. You know, the brain is very responsive to what's going on, so it's reversible brain damage. You can re-stimulate those areas and repair them. But memory loss is one of them. So it's damaging learning. And this is, again, this is Nora Volkoff's work. This is work actually that's being done around the world. And researchers are using a number of different techniques, and they're all coming to the same place, that obesity correlates with this loss of learning, loss of memory, loss of decision-making, loss of restraint, and loss of satiation abilities. So, set point, I often wonder if that person is eating and just not remembering it. These people, I mean, in my opinion, they're very honest. They're very determined. They're very clear about what they want, and they have brain damage. So they just deserve our absolute utmost compassion and kindness and patience. They didn't ask for this. The food industry, along with media and some aspects of the health industry, pharmaceuticals, diet, glamour, you know, they all have found a way to make money off of this. And here are these poor food addicts getting the wrong kind of treatment, getting treatment that makes them worse, you know, and then being told that it's their fault. So often they have relationship sensitivity. They have been traumatized by these experiences. Right. You know, it's very heartfelt how badly these people are coming, you know, how badly they've been treated.
Right. Talking about how bad someone is treated and about emotions, Bonnie here is asking if emotional eating is considered a food addiction, or if it's something different, or if it exists.
In my opinion, it does not exist. People have strong emotions that activates the craving pathways in the brain, and their food addiction kicks in. So, for example, in all of the DSM, you don't see a diagnosis for emotional drinking. You don't see a diagnosis for emotional cocaine snorting.
That's funny.
There's no diagnosis for emotional marijuana use. No. You know, that it's so hard to fathom that there are just these horrific addictive substances mixed in with our food, that the health community is just all over the place looking for other explanations. But in my opinion, we do have evidence that strong emotions activate the disease. So it looks like emotional eating. I have an emotion, I eat. But there is a piece of the loop that's not being taken into consideration. I eat, that activates my craving pathways, it shuts off my cognitive centers, and I eat. I lose my mind and I eat. So it looks like emotional eating, but it's just activation of the addiction.
I've never met anybody emotionally eat steamed kale. Have you? I mean, I've never seen that.
No, it does not.
And the way I look at it is that the difference in the Ultimate Weight Loss program that I won, the way we often determine the difference between an addictive food and a non-addictive food is whether or not you can eat it in the absence of hunger. So, for example, I eat vegetables for breakfast. When I get off the spin bike, I'm starving, and steamed kale tastes great, but I sure wouldn't want it for dessert. But no matter how much I eat, there's always room. You know, there's always room for Jell-O. There's always room for a cookie or cake or candy or hot fudge sundae. And that, to me, is the difference. When you can eat it in the absence of hunger, especially if you've just eaten, you can't do that with non-addictive foods. I mean, I don't think you really can.
Right. Right. You know, that what you're talking about, in a way, is criteria number 4, which is cravings. Mm-hmm. So you've eaten, but you still want something to eat. That could indicate the presence of a craving. Yeah.
Dr. Ifland, we always have people arguing for their type of sugar and flour. So I know the answer to this, but I think it's important for you to say, is sugar, sugar, and flour, flour, or are some worse or some better? Because my understanding is that we need to avoid all of them if we have this biogenetic disease of food addiction. So it doesn't matter if we call it stevia or erythritol or xylitol or mannitol or organic cane sugar or succonet or barley malt or maple syrup or honey or high fructose corn syrup. And it doesn't matter if we call it whole wheat flour or chickpea flour or lentil flour, or if we grind the oats ourselves. To our brains, isn't sugar, sugar, and flour, flour.
Right, right. So the disease starts off, it starts off by even just thinking. You just think about an addictive food, the brain starts pumping out these neurotransmitters, these dopamine, opiates, serotonin, endorphin, endocannabinoids, and the cognitive centers shut down. So you can start that reaction just by thinking about something. A momentary exposure to a picture can set off that chain reaction. But once you've started eating the food, if you're eating a carbohydrate that can get into your system very quickly, you set off another set of reactions. And this is one of my arguments for why food addiction is actually worse than, for example, cocaine addiction. It's because it's also setting off chain reactions in the rest of the body. So you get the surge of glucose in the bloodstream. There's nothing to stop flour. There's nothing to stop sugar from getting into the bloodstream. It's almost like it's pre-digested. You get a glucose high, you get an insulin release, which takes that glucose and puts it into fat cells. And then you have a glucose crash. You get the adrenals pumping out corticosterol, adrenaline to bring that glucose back up. And now you're kind of an emotional mess. You don't have enough glucose. You've got all this corticosterol in your bloodstream, and you're destabilized. You have corresponding ups and downs in your neurotransmitters, and that's another source of cravings. When your blood sugar is too low, you want to eat. You want to eat. You want to eat. Yep. So really, flour has two things to consider. One is the refinement. You have this little tiny particle that can get into your bloodstream very quickly, and then that's compounded by the gluten issue, gluteomorphine. So yeah.
What about gluten-free flours, people will say then, I bet. Well, are those healthy?
They're going to get into your bloodstream too quickly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is it possible to break addiction on your own, or do you need really help?
I do not recommend it. I don't recommend trying this on your own. We're herd animals. You know, humans like to travel in groups. We're comfortable in groups. If I were to try to break my food addiction by myself, I would be totally outside of the culture and alone. And that's an uncomfortable position for a human being. We don't like that. There is pressure to conform to the people around us. I think the most important thing is that you be around people, successful, like-minded people. So that's what we're trying to create on Facebook. We now have 7,200 and some people in our big public group. Anybody can belong there as long as they're not marketing. And then we have smaller groups that we call the intensive, where people get individual attention, they get a 24-hour interaction, they get a daily phone call, they get friends. You got to remember that criteria about relationships. A lot of people, when they've been in the addiction, they're really tragically isolated. So Facebook is a great way for them to very gradually and very tenderly and very slowly start to make connections with other people. And that's a really beautiful thing to see. So I think the person has to kind of persuade the brain that they've moved to another country, that they have a new tribe, and this is what the tribe does, and these are the customs of the tribe, and they will slowly, by being exposed a lot to this group of people, what they do, we post pictures of our meals, pictures of our exercise, we have small chats for sleep issues, etc., etc. If the more a person can immerse themselves in what we're offering through the intensive, what we're offering even in the Facebook big group, which is free, the better they're going to do. It's just you've got to persuade that brain that you're no longer in the food industry culture, you're in a recovery culture, a healing culture, a clean food culture. You've got to do that, in my opinion.
Aren't there other brain stabilizing activities that you recommend in addition to just having a food plan?
Yes, honestly, I think the food plan's only about 25%. If you do the food plan alone and you don't do these other things, you'll get about 25% of the way. So remember that what we're doing here is we're trying to heal the brain. So there are other very powerful things that will heal the brain. They include exercise. Exercise is a great brain healer. They include meditation. They include sleep. Sleep, a nice, solid fully cycled sleep, to me, is essential for recovery from food addiction. That's something that food addicts struggle with to a surprising degree. Their sleep has been profoundly disrupted for a whole range of reasons. And then there are things like crafts. Crafts are a great way to restore the brain. We just opened a website called Food Addiction Books, so that people would start reading instead of watching television. Reading is brain restorative. Television, most of television is brain, diminishing.
And you're exposed to cues like commercials with hyperpalatable food.
Yes, yes. There are obvious cues like commercials, and then there are a lot of subtle cues that would trigger somebody to be nervous about what they're eating. What, do I have enough food? So yeah, it's in my opinion, the more a person does of all of these things, the more likely they are to avoid relapse. So the more likely they are to avoid that, the second criteria, failure to cut back. But you've got, the shift is to shift away from weight loss and to brain restoration. Cognitive restoration is what it's called. Yeah.
One of the things I learned from you a while back, Dr. Ifland, is that a clean abstinence is an easy abstinence. And what I admire about you is many of the other professionals that I've met or interviewed that treat or talk about food addiction, they allow many things in the food plan that I wouldn't eat, that you wouldn't eat, that my boss and mentor, Dr. Goldhammer, wouldn't eat. And I wonder how people can recover when some of the people are saying, yeah, dairy's fine. A lot of the high fat foods like nuts are fine, or the high fat meats, or for example, some of them are still saying flour's fine. And I think it really does confuse people, or maybe they're drawn to these people because then they don't have to really give up the things they're addicted to. But I like your criterion because I'm abstinent of all those things you said, and I think it helps when you just have a clean slate and don't have any of them.
Well, I really am indebted to Kay Shepherd for that whole concept. That these are addictive substances, our brains respond badly to them, and it's a lifetime of abstinence, one day at a time. She set the standard. She got the treatment protocol, just nailed it. So I'm very grateful to her for those concepts. And you look at a book, I'm not going to name the book, but it's a popular book right now, which recommends taking out everything for 30 days, and then starting to put it back in. So these authors just are not buying into the addiction model, because if you finally got somebody off of alcohol and cocaine and marijuana and cigarettes, you wouldn't say, okay, now we're ready to put them back in. You would never do that. So yeah, that's sad. I have another little bee in my bonnet right now, which is now we have professionals who are telling people that they must learn to eat these addictive substances. So this is very much like telling an alcoholic, you've got to learn how to drink. And that makes me so sad. And they're doing this again because this is just my opinion, they're misinterpreting a sequence of events. So in withdrawal, cravings can become more intense. And if you don't know that that's what's going on, you're going to cave and you're going to go get the food. If you're not in a group of like-minded people and you're not being encouraged, hang on, it's just a few more days, then you're going to cave. I can't bear this. You don't know that it's going to go away in a couple of days, and so you cave and you eat the food. Now, an addiction or an eating disorder person might say, well, you need to learn how to eat that food, because then when the cravings that built to that point, they binge. So the professional says, oh, well, just eat a little bit and we'll teach you how to eat that mindfully. No, please don't do that.
Right.
Anyway, yeah.
I guess it would be like trying to give up alcohol by drinking a little bit instead of, I don't know, whatever they drink every day.
Yeah, it's very sad.
Dr. Ifland, do you have any thoughts regarding using fasting or water-only fasting as a way to aid in the process of healing?
I think that is one of the things that has spread food addiction. So there are studies out there showing that if you deprive a person of food or you just don't give them enough food, they develop food obsession, which looks a heck of a lot like an addiction. A craving, an obsession, your brain is preoccupied with these substances. So all of that restricted calorie dieting, which is still being recommended, in my opinion, I think that makes food addiction worse. And it doesn't work. You know, we know that in a very calorie-dense culture, which is what we have, people are going to find it, and the survival instincts in the body, I think, override rational thought, and they will just make that person eat. It's not even a decision. It doesn't come up as a decision. It's just all of a sudden, my hands, of their own accord, are putting this stuff in my mouth. And that is, yeah, so I'm definitely just, my goodness, fill yourself up with high fiber food, do it 3.5 times a day, be satisfied, be nourished, don't ever let yourself get hungry, you know, etc. I'm very much about stabilizing.
Do we need to eat when we're hungry instead of just thinking, okay, I have to eat breakfast and I have to eat lunch and I have to eat dinner?
You know, I think it's a relief. It's a relief to have this relationship with food confined to 3.5 times a day. It means you eat every 4 or 5 hours, and you're not hungry between meals. So if you're hungry between meals, in my opinion, you've left something out of a meal, you haven't eaten enough. I mean, you've got to get your fats, you've got to get all your fiber, you've got to get this balance. And if you're hungry between meals, now it's possible that you have depleted calories because of some activity, but oftentimes people find that exercise makes their cravings go down. They're less hungry when they exercise. So no, oh my goodness. The idea that we would eat when we were hungry, considering that all of our appetite mechanisms have been deranged by processed foods, by the advertising, by the availability, by people constantly talking about it, the idea that you would rely on this broken mechanism to tell you when to eat is just inappropriate. It does not apply. You just fight to get a schedule together, and then after a while you'll notice that your body is hungry at those correct times and no other times of the day. You've got this under control, and it's peaceful, calm, it's orderly. It's terrific. Yeah, recovery is incredible. Yeah.
Doctor, people are asking about things like avocados, nuts, and are other whole food fats addictive, and also is pasta okay, and rice and potatoes?
Okay. If you are listening and you are anywhere near your computer or your phone, I'm going to tell you how to get to the files at Food Addiction Education. So this is my cell phone. On a cell phone, you open up your Facebook app, and then you touch the small I. Well, you open up your app and you get to the Food Addiction Education group. There's a small I in the upper right-hand corner. You touch that, and eventually you will get to the word files. So open up those files. On a tablet, you're looking for the word more, ... And on a computer, the files link is right below the profile picture at the top. So there are our lists. You're going to look for the list of unprocessed foods, and you're going to look for the list of excluded foods. And on the list of excluded foods, there is an explanation for why that food has been excluded. So nuts, for example, have psychotropic ingredients, including tryptophan, which converts to serotonin. Kay Shepard also nailed this. It's a hand-to-mouth food, and people report that they just lose control over their hand. Their hand is going to get the next bite, and they're not doing anything they can't stop it. So Kay's very smart about hand-to-mouth foods, and there's no reason to be eating between meals. When you eat all the quantities on the food plan, you're full. And people look at those quantities and they say, oh, I couldn't possibly eat this. Take it slow, just take it one bite at a time, rest, and you'll be, after a couple of weeks, your stomach will expand enough and you can eat more in one sitting. Yeah, fiber is great because it expands the stomach. We have great research from a colleague of Nora Volkoff's, Jean-Jacques Wang, showing that when the stomach is extended, serotonin travels from the stomach to the brain and attaches to serotonin receptors and creates the sensation of satisfaction. So all the fiber in these meals is very important. Yes, it cleans out the gut, but it also creates that sensation of satisfaction.
I agree with you. However, there's a few questions about animal protein because a lot of the people that follow myself and Gustavo are following a plant-based diet, and animal protein doesn't have fiber. So is it possible to do something like this using plant proteins like beans or tempeh or something like that?
Okay, well, I'm not a fan of soy, but okay. I have met now so many people who have done a vegan plan successfully that I have actually opened a section in the intensive for vegans.
Nice, thank you.
Now, it's already an uphill battle. You have this very oppressive culture that does not want us to quit eating these foods. It's very profitable to eat these foods for a number of different industries. But we have an uphill battle. Addictions come from environments, and we're in the worst possible environment. So we've got a tough one. Veganism makes it somewhat tougher because a vegan diet, by definition, is a high-carb diet, and you've got carb sensitivity from the sugars and the flours being ingested so often, activating those particular addictive pathways in the brain. You've got carb sensitivity. So in my opinion, and I'm just starting really to fight the fight with these vegans, I mean, fight alongside them, not against them, is that they've got to do a lot of extra brain stabilizing. They're not going to be able to get away with not exercising, not doing their meditations. They're not going to be able to get away with watching television. They're going to have a craft. They're going to have to associate a strong smell like lavender with these calming activities, so that when they get into a stimulating situation, that they can pull out that smell and trigger their brain back into a calm place. Just as the food industry triggers us into a craving place, if you associate a non-food smell with a calming activity by smelling it while you're doing the activity, you can pull that smell out in a situation where you've been bombarded by cues, you have a craving, you're about to slip out of control, you can smell your calming smell and snap that brain back. So vegans, this is just my opinion, literally, guys. I have just made this decision in the last couple of months that based on me, just my observations, that I see people being successful, A. B, I have people coming in who just are violently ill when they eat animal protein. They still deserve help. They still deserve a safe environment, the best advice I can possibly give them, but they are going to have a bigger fight.
Thank you so much. So I recommend everyone read your book if they haven't, Sugars and Flours, How They Make Us Crazy, Sick and Fat. It's an excellent book, and it really does explain a lot of what you're talking about, especially with the flour. So how can people find you? How can they join your Facebook group, and how can they join your intensives or anything else that you might be offering?
Okay, so we have, yes, I think probably most of your members, or most of the people here are on Facebook. Food Addiction Education. So that is that's a group of experts like myself who are we are educating. You know, nobody's going to give advice over the internet. That's just irresponsible. But educating about the disease. So that's a very, very good place to start. We do have a website called Food Addiction Intensive, and I cannot recommend that enough. People are always worried about the cost of the intensive, but we have a range. We go from $0 to $15 a week, and we are happy. No matter, just the ability to pay is not a factor. I'm acutely aware that this disease devastates people's finances, or can. But I do want to encourage the people for whom $15 a week is nothing to go ahead and pay that, because that helps us finance the rest of the people. So Food Addiction Intensive. Now, I'm really excited about food addiction books because I do want to encourage people to start reading. That will help repair brain function. So please go to Food Addiction Books, click on the books to get over to Amazon. So Food Addiction Books is an Amazon affiliate. And when you're going to shop on Amazon, go over there, start your shopping trip there. You don't have to buy what you click on. We get a very tiny commission, but that helps us finance the people who cannot pay. And then we're going to start an effort called Food Addiction Shop, where people can get the equipment that they need for recovery. So we have a number of projects going. I am working on that textbook. I hope to have it done by the end of this year or early next year. It's really for health professionals. I think it would be difficult for a layperson to read because it's science. Yeah, so we've got a lot going on.
Dr. Ifland, thank you so much for being here today. In just a few minutes, we will need to close the webinar so that it doesn't go over an hour. And before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to share or tell the listeners about how to get in touch with you, or the website, anything like that?
Yeah, well, they can email me. They can email foodintensive@gmail.com. They can email me personally, Joan Ifland @gmail.com, but the best way is foodintensive@gmail.com. I really, if I were to leave with one thought, it is this, which food addicts have been treated terribly. They have been given these solutions based on weight loss that have made their condition worse. Many of them are afraid to try again. That's heartbreaking. So the one thing I would say to everybody who ever listens to this webinar, try again. Try again.
Right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. I know that in this webinar, we have people of many different backgrounds and ideas of what they need to eat and want to eat. But I am of the idea that we all learn something. So to all of you over there, please don't be close-minded. Just listen. You will always learn something. And there may be things that you don't agree tonight, but I'm sure that something that was said tonight by Dr. Ifland, who is an incredible professional, there's something that we all can take from this and use it for our benefit. So thank you again. And thank you, Chef AJ.
Thanks, Chef AJ. You guys are terrific. I appreciate your help so much. I really hope that we reach a lot of people with this webinar. Thank you.
Well, hopefully this will not be the last one, and we will see you sometime in the near future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to learn how to do podcasts. I do want to do more of the webinars. Yeah, we're on it. We're really working to create a lot of vehicles to get this information out to people who need it.
Hopefully we will see you in the near future. Thank you so much, Dr. Ifland. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, bye-bye.